There are moments in American history that change the national conscience. Yesterday we heard about the assassination of President Kennedy. Some of you might be old enough to remember the attack of Pearl Harbor. And for most recently in American history, of course, the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Today you're going to hear a riveting account, a heroic story of a man whose story I believe will really pull at your heartstrings. And to moderate that panel today, or that interview, conduct our interview today, is Mary Aker, who's no stranger to this stage, good friend, presidential historian, and a great interviewer. If you'll put your hands together for Miss Mary.
Where's Eric Gordon? Okay, not here yet. All right, my dears.
There they are. Hi, sweetheart. There's my family back there. Yeah.
All right, I'm here to introduce you to Michael Hingson, and, well, it's Alamo today, but when you know him, oh, it's not turned on?
It's not coming out very loud.
Hmm?
Keep talking, Mary.
Keep talking, Mary. Nobody ever said that to me before. Can you hear me now? All right, all right. Well, I just am so honored to have met Michael Hingson and Alamo. You know by what you see that he came down from the 78th floor of the North Tower with his guide dog, Roselle. But I have a friend named Doug Weed who always told me, you don't brag on yourself, you get somebody else to brag on you. And I want to brag on Michael before we start this, before I ask him to tell this story. Michael was a premature baby, and at the time when he was born, they put the babies the premature babies in an incubator, sealed, with 100% oxygen. And the doctors didn't know that then, but it blinded the children. And Michael was blinded at birth. Okay. Turn me on. Oh, okay. Thank you. Is it on?
Yes, it
Is it on?
Yeah, it is on.
Okay. Okay. So my friend Doug Weed told me, don't brag on yourself. Let somebody else do bragging on you.
We're going to get a real quick sound check. Could you say hello to everybody?
Hello to everybody,
Okay.
and to anybody else who's not in the everybody here.
So Michael was very fortunate that he had parents that refused to allow him to even think about being disabled. They mainstreamed him before mainstreaming was even known. And they taught him to ride a bicycle. They let him drive a car. And later in his life, he actually piloted an airplane. Is that amazing? He loved mathematics. He loved physics. He was taught geometry. He solved math problems in his head. He's got a master's degree in physics and another not a master's, but a regular in teaching. So that is why he is such an amazing man. He's never, ever let this, what other people call a disability, stop him at all. As a matter of fact, he has been such an amazing gift to the unsighted community in the Braille and things that technology that blind people can utilize to be online and be all kinds of things that they wouldn't ever have been allowed to do even 50 years ago. So anyway, I'm just so honored to have met you, Michael. It's just been amazing. I'm going to take him to Lambert's tomorrow. He says I have to catch the rolls. Or somebody else will catch them and they'll eat them and he won't get any. I promised him I'd catch the rolls. All right, my dear Michael, would you start telling us about that horrendous day?
I am going to not do what I said I was going to do. I'm going to stand up. And I'm going to be very interested to go to Lambert's to see what they do with me, since normally they would throw the rolls as I understand it. And I'm going to point out that doesn't really work, so now what are you going to do? Because if they all fall on the floor and the dog gets them, and the dog gets sick, you guys are in trouble. So I'll be interested to see exactly what happens. No, I'm sure it will work out. Mary, thank you for those kind words. I'd like to start by defining a couple things to help us in all of this. Mary is absolutely right about what my parents did in their position. The doctors told my parents when it was discovered I was blind at about 4 months of age that I should be sent to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to amount to anything or contribute to society. If you think that's bad, it was worse in other parts of the world where when children were born who were blind were just drowned in a bucket of water. So in a sense, it wasn't as bad. Not every child who was born premature and put in an incubator did go blind. And it's unfortunate in a sense that at the time that I was born, Dr. Arnold Papps at the Wilmer Eye Institute at Johns Hopkins University had discovered that, in fact, oxygen could cause blindness, and even a few minutes a day of a non-oxygen environment would drop the incidence of blindness down to 0. But medical science didn't believe him because they said, well, too much oxygen can't be a problem. And what Dr. Arnold Papps essentially really proved is that too much of anything can be a problem. So it is an issue. I finally actually some time ago got to meet Dr. Papps before he passed. It was fascinating to talk with him about that. The condition at the time when I was born was called retrolental fibroplasia. If you want to know how to spell that, I wrote a book called Thunderdog, the story of a blind man, his guide dog, and the triumph of trust at ground zero, which we planned to have here, but the publisher messed up, so it wasn't. But you can go buy Thunderdog anywhere and you can learn how to spell retrolental fibroplasia. It is now called retinopathy of prematurity. I guess that's a little easier to spell. I don't know still why they changed the name, but they did. So fine, I don't care. I am blind, I don't care. Blindness isn't the problem. I've learned from my parents and growing up and being alive now for, 74 years, blindness isn't the problem. The problem is our perception of blindness, what we believe blind people can and can't do as opposed to what they truly can and can't do. If you want to really see a story or something about a blind person driving a car, there is a website, www.blinddriverchallenge.org. Blinddriverchallenge.org. The president of the National Federation of the Blind in October of 2001 challenged private industry and universities to create a vehicle that a blind person could drive. Not an autonomous vehicle, but truly a vehicle that would transmit to the blind person the information necessary for them to drive the vehicle. What you will see at blinddriverchallenge.org is a video of a gentleman named Mark Riccobono, too many Marks, Mark Riccobono driving a vehicle independently without any assistance around the Daytona Speedway right before the 2011 Rolex 24 race. He will go through an obstacle course. He will pass boxes that are being thrown out of a van to try to block his way. He will pass the van and a number of things like that. The reality is, what is driving? It's all about you having the information necessary for you to control your vehicle. And as far as I'm concerned, given what Mark Riccobono did, and given the reality that the information is available to us, given the way most sighted drivers drive, I'll take me any day. Especially where I live in Victorville, my gosh. But the reality is blindness isn't the problem. I grew up believing that. I went to public school. I went to college. I did get a master's degree in physics. As I love to tell people, I'm as good as Doc Brown from Back to the Future in building reactors and nuclear bombs. The only difference between me and Doc Brown is I won't go steal fissionable material from some source that might come after me later. So, you know, I think I was a little smarter than Doc Brown. But the fact is, again, it's not the problem. I was also the program director of the campus radio station for a while, and I worked at the campus radio station KUCI 89.9 on your FM dial for 7 years. I did a show playing old radio shows every Sunday night from 6 to 9. Didn't even know what 60 Minutes was. I heard about it. And one day, finally, somebody from the show, or from the Orange County Jail called and said, we've really got a situation, we want you to know about it. Here at the jail, people have heard about you, they've heard about 60 Minutes, and on Sunday nights, we have to divide the jail in half. Half of the people go up to a television room to watch 60 Minutes, and the other half, which is the bigger half, want to hear your show playing old radio shows on Sunday nights. So, you know, we must be doing something right that even at the jail they liked us. I went to work in 1976 for the National Federation of the Blind. It's the largest organization of blind consumers in the country. I was offered a position because I was in the science world, one of the few at the time in that world. And the president of the Federation, Dr. Jernigan, told me in late 74, early 75, we got a situation. There's a guy named Ray Kurzweil. You may have heard of Ray. He's a futurist. He's an inventor. He's invented the singularity. I'm not totally sure I agree with everything that Ray says. You know, Ray once said, the only problem with God is we haven't invented him yet. I don't agree with that. And the other part about it is Ray says that we're really going to all become part of the world when chips are created that will allow us to directly interact with computers. Well, we'll see. I don't want a chip in my brain yet. But Ray at that time had developed a piece of technology that would actually look at a printed page. It actually had to build it up line by line, so it wasn't like snapping a picture, but it would learn to recognize all the characters on that page, no matter what their type styles or print styles were, and it would read it out loud, called the Kurzweil Reading Machine for the Blind. Just like with blindness and retrolental fibroplasia, the government didn't believe he could do it because nobody else had been able to do it, and so they wouldn't help fund it. He came to the Federation, and the Federation said, tell you what we're going to do, Ray. I'm not sure they said it quite that way, but tell you what we're going to do, Ray. We're going to send somebody up there with a bunch of material, and if your machine reads what we bring up, not what you want to read, if it reads what we bring up, then we're going to help you get funding. And Ray, I'm sure, again, it wasn't quite the way he said it, but he said, bring it on. They did, it did, and a relationship began that exists to this day. A machine that literally would read print out loud, and Ray wanted the first application of omnifont optical character recognition to be a machine that would read print out loud for blind people. We created a project where we purchased several machines, and then for 18 months from 1976 in October through June of 1978, I lived in suitcases or out of suitcases in hotels, traveling around the country where we put machines at places like the New York Public Library, the Iowa Commission for the Blind, the San Francisco Public Library, and some other agencies for the blind around the country. The idea being that we wanted blind people to come and use the machine, read whatever they wanted to read, and then give us information about what needed to go into a final production model of the machine. I wrote training curriculum. I wrote the technical manuals for teaching people how to use the machine. I taught people to use it. I observed people using it, sometimes grabbed my old soldering gun and fixed things that broke on the machines. These were $50,000, 400-pound machines. They weren't little things like an app on an iPhone today, right? So anyway, we finally wrote the final recommendations, and then Ray said, I want to hire you to come and do the same sort of thing within the company. So I went to work for Ray, moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Actually, I moved to Winthrop, Massachusetts, learned how to go from Winthrop to Cambridge every day. And we began a relationship, and I worked at Kurzweil Computer Products. And that started in, again, October of 1978. In May of 1978, I was called into the office of the VP of Marketing, and Andrew Parsons said, we're laying you off. What? We're laying you off. Why? Oh, it's not that you're doing a bad job or anything, but unfortunately, like a lot of engineering startup companies, we've hired too many people who aren't revenue producers, and we have to have more revenue producers. And so as important as your job is, it's not as important as making money for the company, so we have to lay you off. Then he paused and he said, unless you'll go into sales. Now, I'm a science guy. However, I thought about it for a micro nanosecond, and I said, sure, I'll go into sales. As I love to tell people, I decided I would lower my standards and go from science to sales. And did. I said, I don't know anything about sales. He said, we'll send you to a Dale Carnegie sales course and all that. Well, I started selling, but not the reading machine for the blind. Instead, I sold a new product they had called the Kurzweil data entry machine. And unlike the reading machine for the blind that sold for $50,000, if you want one, we might be able to find one of the old machines for you for $49,995. Instead, I sold a new product called the Kurzweil data entry machine, which was only $125,000. I guess they had confidence in my ability. And I was very grateful for it. The real reason that I didn't want to refuse the sales position is I knew that at that time, and it's still somewhat today, the unemployment rate among employable blind people is close to 70, that is 70%. It's not because we can't do the work, it's because people think we won't be able to do the work and don't give us the opportunity. So the bottom line is, I lowered my standards and went from science to sales and did that for a while. And then in 1981, while Xerox was considering and actually working toward buying the product, I was asked by Ray and the VP of sales to move back to California, where I was from, to help integrate Kurzweil into the Xerox West Coast environment, including their research center called Palo Alto Area Research Center, PARC. And I did. And my thanks for that was that after the whole sale was consummated and Xerox completely took over, I was the last salesperson in June of 1984 to receive a FedEx letter saying, thank you for your service, but we don't want you anymore, goodbye. Because all Xerox wanted was the technology, they didn't want the people. Now I was confronted with the situation. How am I going to find a job? What am I going to do? 70% unemployment. And I went out and I wrote lots of cover letters, sent out lots of resumes, and I even got a headhunter who called me and said, love your resume. We're going to have you interview with this company up in San Jose, California. We'll send you a ticket. They sent me the ticket. The night before the flight, the guy calls back and he says, you know, I was just looking at your resume again. I see you do a lot of things with blind people. Is there somebody in your family who's blind? You notice that? And I said, yeah, I'm blind. You're blind? Well, I'm going to have to call them. They're not going to want to talk to you. I said, nothing has changed. My resume is still the same. But you're blind. It's all changed. No, it hasn't. There were no laws to stand on. The reservation was canceled, and I didn't do the interview. Their loss. Eventually, not finding a job, I started my own company, selling computer-aided design systems to architects. A blind guy selling CAD systems? Why the heck not? I didn't need to work the machine. What I needed to know was how to work the machine so I could describe it to architects and I could sit them down in front of a machine and talk with them and talk them through it. We also hired people to demo CAD systems. And I did that for 4 years, and then I went back into the workforce. And when I went back into the workforce, my wife and I were talking one day, and she said, you know, I got this great job I just discovered in the newspaper. It's selling high-end, new, revolutionary, hot pluggable disk technology. It's perfect for you. You should apply. And I said to my wife, Karen, who I had married in 1982, by the way, Karen also had a disability, quote. She was in a wheelchair her whole life. She reads, I push, worked out well. I said, so do I say in my cover letter I'm blind or not? Because typically if you say you're blind, same thing will happen with the headhunter. You won't even get a call back. If you don't say you're blind, you might get a call back, but then they're going to have all their defenses go up when you show up for the interview. And she said, you're an idiot. Wives can do that, gentlemen, and it's fine. You're an idiot. Why? What's the most important thing you always said to every salesperson you ever hired? Well, I wasn't quite sure which things she was thinking of. I had several things that I always said to salespeople I hired. She said, you always told every salesperson you ever hired, turn, here's the operative word, perceived liabilities into assets. You ever watch those little cartoons in the newspapers and all that where the light bulb goes on over your head? Well, that's what happened. And I went and I wrote a cover letter to send with this resume to this company. And here are the last two paragraphs of the letter. The most important thing you need to know about me is that I am blind. As a blind person, I have had to sell all my life just to be able to function and survive. I've had to sell to take my guide dog on airplanes. I didn't tell them that we had to sue one airline because they violated their own policy because they wouldn't let me go on an airplane with my guide dog. I've had to sell to convince people to let me buy a house, move into apartments, sometimes take my guide dog into grocery stores, and do anything else because I was blind. So I've always had to sell. So, second paragraph, when you're hiring someone for this job, do you want to hire somebody who comes in and works for 8 or 10 hours a day and then just goes home because the job is over? Or do you want to truly hire somebody who understands sales for the science and art that it is and who sells 24 hours a day as a way of life? Sent off the letter, waited for 2 weeks, wondering if I'd get a call or an email. Well, no, not an email, not back then. But in late May 1989, I got a call. This is Doug Cooper, head of marketing for Articon. We loved your letter. Would you come for an interview? And I said, sure. Next day, we were down there. I was hired and started on July 2nd, 1989. Loved to start on the 2nd of July, or actually the 3rd of July, because then I got the next day off. It was great. So I went to work for them, and we moved from where we were living in Mission Viejo down to Vista, California. The company was in Carlsbad. I began selling to the East Coast, selling our technologies and other technologies, Sun Microsystems products, and so on. And then in 1996, the owner of the company asked me to move to New York for them because we were selling to Wall Street. Wall Street was always good at getting and demanding and getting what they demanded. And they always said, if you are a manufacturer and you're selling products to us, we want a representative, not an agent, but we want the company in Wall Street arena to be able to hold responsible and deal with. So we moved to New York, and I went to work on the 23rd floor of Tower 2 of the World Trade Center, and was there for about a year, and then was recruited away by another company. And it wasn't hard because Articon did not figure out how to support a branch operation. So I was recruited away, and then in 1999 I was recruited away by Quantum Corporation, and now we're getting to what Mary asked about, but I needed to give you the background. Hope it was okay. So in 1999, I was hired to open an office for Quantum Corporation in New York City. Quantum was a company that made products called tape libraries. They were big boxes that consisted of tape drives and lots of tape cartridges, and you would attach them to computer networks, and then you would use software like one called Veritas, which is still used today. And what you would do is you would back up all of your data over the network into these tape libraries onto tape cartridges, and then you would take the tape cartridges out and store them off-site. Now I got to stop and be spiteful, because in New Jersey, they love to say that they stored them in a town called Mountainside under a mountain. You ever see a mountain in northern New Jersey? I came from California, where we had mountains that were 8, 9, 10,000 feet tall. They didn't even have decent hills, but they still called it a mountain. That was fine, whatever. They still were able to store the tapes in safe places. But the point is that all the data was backed up off-site, which is what they needed to do. We opened the actual office on August 1st, 2000. I hired a staff, and we had a staff that came in and sold, and we also worked with resellers. And in August of 2001, our main distributor, Ingram Micro, said, you know, we got a lot of resellers who are selling your products, but they don't really know how to do it. Can we hold some seminars to teach your reseller partners, our customers, the resellers, how to sell your product? I said, you bet. And we worked it out with the folks at Quantum. David Frank, who was in charge of pricing and distribution, said he wanted to come back to be a part of the seminars, and we set up doing the seminars. The idea was that we would teach them. I would be their main point of contact. Since I worked and lived there, David would be the person that I or they would contact with any pricing issues, but I would be the technical point of contact. Master's degree in physics helps. And so we set up the seminars, and wouldn't you know it, we set them up to be held on September 11th, 2001. The evening before, or the morning of September 11th, about 12:30, Roselle, my guide dog at the time, woke me up. She was very nervous and fidgety. I knew what it was like when she was fidgety. It was usually because it was a thunderstorm. She didn't like thunder. And we went down to my office, and of course a thunderstorm did happen, and the storm literally came right over our house. I've never been in an environment where bombs went off around me, but I got to say that in this case, the thunderclaps were, as I said, literally right over us, and it had to be like what a bomb sounds like going off. Anyway, it went on till about 2, and then we went back up and got a couple more hours of sleep, 3 more hours of sleep. I got up, we went in, and got to the office at about 7:40 in the morning on September 11th. As I came to the door, somebody came up with a cart. It turns out it was a guy from the Port Authority cafeteria. We were going to be providing breakfast and snacks for the first and second seminarians. We had seminars going all day. So we went in, I showed him where I wanted him to set up everything in the conference room. I went in, got my laptop computer out of my backpack briefcase. I got my PowerPoint projector, and I went into the conference room and set everything up because I was going to be doing a PowerPoint show that day to give people all the information they needed about the ATL P3000, the ATL P1000, and so on. Yes, blind people can do PowerPoint, folks. It's not magic. You sighted bigots. So I had a script. And my wife and I had created the script, and I'd used it many times. The script was in Braille. I knew what was on every slide. We put a couple of things in addition on the script. We put all the wording from the slides on the script, and we also put on the script descriptions of the pictures as well as where the picture would show up on the screen. So I would, for example, when we showed this to other customers around the city, I'd blow their minds because I would be doing the presentation. My sales guys loved it when I went out and did PowerPoint presentations because I could just point over my shoulder. On the left side of your screen, you'll see the ATL P3000 with 16 drives, 326 cartridges, and you see the label that says Prism Technology. We could hook 5 of them together. On the right side of your screen, you'll see the ATL P1000, which was a single unit with 30 cartridges and 1 tape drive. And people would come up to me afterwards and they'd say, you know, we're ticked at you. And I go, why? Well, first of all, your presentation was not boring, which usually they are. But second of all, you never turned and looked at the screen. You kept looking at us, even though you were pointing right to where everything was with your laser pointer. We didn't dare fall asleep. We forgot you were blind. And my response was, you don't get it. My dog was down here taking notes. If you'd fallen asleep, we would have got you anyway. But that was what it was about. My responsibility was to be the leader of that office, and I had to do what anyone else would do. One of the main things that I did was spend hours, days, walking around the World Trade Center, learning what the kiosks were in the shopping mall on the first floor, learning where different offices were, consulting with the Port Authority police and the fire prevention people, learning what to do in case of an emergency. Because sometimes I might be in the office all by my little self. There would be nobody else around. I didn't want my staff in the office. I wanted them out selling and working and supporting customers, not being in the office. Of course, they did usually come in at least once a week, and so I learned, never watched The Sopranos, but I got to tell you, I learned more about The Sopranos from all the Italian Americans on my staff who talked about The Sopranos constantly, bada bing, bada boom. And I learned a whole lot about Tony Soprano without ever watching the show. But the point is that I needed to know all that stuff. I needed to know where the restaurants were. Customers come into the office. Oh, you want to go out to lunch? What kind of food do you want? There's a great deli downstairs called Fine and Shapiro. Let me take you there. How would it have looked if I didn't know how to do that and I had to say to someone, you're going to have to let me take your arm and lead me there because I don't know how to get there, and 2 hours later we're supposed to be negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts? No, I needed to know it. I didn't have the luxury, and I don't regard it as a luxury, I regard it as a disability, of reading signs. I needed to know all of that stuff. What I didn't realize is that was creating a mindset in me, which I'll talk about in a moment. Anyway, got all the laptop projectors and everything set up. The only thing I knew I didn't know how to do extremely well is to get it exactly aimed right. But about 8 o'clock, David Frank came in and I said, say, David, this is all set up, but let's aim the projector just exactly where you want it on the screen. And we did have to turn it just a little bit, but not too much. But anyway, at 8:45, I was in my office and David was with me. We were creating a final list of all the people who were going to be attending the seminars because the Port Authority police, the security people, needed to know who was coming. And there were two ways you could get into the building. Either we faxed on letterhead a list of people who were coming on any given day, and then the people coming in would show their photo IDs and it would be verified against the list. And if they were allowed in, then they would be given a badge that they would put over their neck, and they would carry that, and they could scan the barcode and go to the appropriate elevator to come up to our floor. Or they'd have to call us every time somebody came in, and I didn't want a lot of phone calls coming in. So we were faxing the list. I was reaching for letterhead to fax, to print the list on letterhead, when suddenly I heard and felt kind of a muffled thump and a vibration. And then literally, if you, any blind people in the room? Well, I'll do it anyway. I'm holding up my hand, and what happened was that literally, as I'm now tipping my hand toward you, the building began to tip. We probably moved about 20 feet. The building kept tipping and tipping. David and I said together, what's going on? I don't know, what's going on? What do you think? Was it an explosion? I said. David said, didn't sound like it. Is it an earthquake? David was from New York, and now he's living in California. He didn't know about earthquakes. I said, no, the building wasn't shaking around. It was going in one direction. And finally, and I went over and I stood in the doorway between my office and the outside lobby of our offices. And I stood there. Roselle was asleep under my desk. David was just on the other side of my desk holding it near our windows looking out over Manhattan, the south side of Manhattan. And finally, David and I both said goodbye to each other because we thought we had moved so far that the building was going to take a 78-floor plunge to the street. And then the building slowed down, and it stopped, and it moved back. As soon as it got vertical, I started walking back into the office. I met Roselle coming around from under my desk. I took her leash. I said heel, which meant to come around behind me to sit and lie down, which is what I would normally have Alamo do, but he's comfortable, so we'll just leave him there. Roselle sat down, and about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. Why did it drop down? Because tall buildings like that literally are springs. They're made to flex in windstorms and other things like that. An airplane hit the Empire State Building in the 1940s because it got lost in a fog bank. Tall buildings are flexible. They have expansion joints. And when the building was hit, the expansion joints took up all of the things that were going on. And then when the building got straight again, the expansion joints dropped back down to their normal configuration. I knew that because I had talked to people about stuff like that. I'd forgotten it until later, but I knew it. What I hadn't realized is that what was happening when I was learning so much stuff was that a mindset was being developed in me that said, you know what to do in an emergency. And as soon as the building dropped, David turned and looked out the window and started shouting, oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the windows. We got to get out of here right now. Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here. The building's on fire. I could hear things rushing and brushing outside our windows, and now I knew what they were. David told me, millions of pieces of burning paper, right? And I didn't smell any smoke. Roselle wasn't doing anything to indicate any concern, and David kept saying, we got to get out of here. The building's on fire. And I kept saying, slow down. Our guests began to scream. We had like 5 or 6 who were in our conference room, early arrivals. They started coming out, but then they heard me say, slow down, stop, David, just wait. And they waited to see what was going to happen. And finally, David used the big line. You don't understand. You can't see it. The problem wasn't what I wasn't seeing. The problem was what David wasn't seeing. A dog sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, who the heck woke me up? I was comfy. Not giving any indication of fear. And I eventually got David to focus. And I said, David, get our guests to the stairs. Don't let them take the elevators, because I knew if there's fire, especially because if there's fire, the elevators could become fire traps. The fire could get into the elevator shafts, which it did, and anybody in the cars would be burned. David left with our guests, got them to the stairs. Meanwhile, I called Karen and told her that there had been an explosion or something. We had no clue. There was no way to know. I love it. Reporters, even today, and other people say, well, of course you didn't know, you couldn't see it. Excuse me, you numbskulls. The last time I checked, Superman and X-ray vision were fiction. And the airplane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. No one knew. All the way down the stairs, we didn't know because no one saw it. No one knew. Anyway, I called and told Karen. She wanted to know more. I said, I don't know anything else. I've got to go because we're not staying here. We knew instantly that we had to leave. But we got our guests out. Then David came back. We swept the offices one last time, went to the stairs, and we started down. If I knew it was the last time I was going to be in the building, I would have taken a couple of things that I didn't take. Like I had a really neat talking scientific calculator that I couldn't replace. And if I had known that I wasn't coming back, I would have taken it. It would have been a little heavier, but I would have taken it. Anyway, we started down the stairs. There were other people, of course, on the stairs. We got down about 4 floors, and I was smelling an odor. I couldn't quite figure it out. And suddenly I realized I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I traveled 100,000 miles a year for my company. I knew what the odor of jet fuel was like. I knew the kerosene smell. But it took a while to associate it with the World Trade Center because no one would have ever thought you would have smelled it there. When I realized what it was, I observed to the other people around me on the stairs, I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. And they said, yeah, you're right. That's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane. You understand? Nobody knew. We must have been hit because of what we're smelling. So we all accepted that that was what was going on, but we had no clue. We continued down the stairs. About 10 floors down, at one point a woman stopped right behind me and she said, I can't go on, I can't breathe, we're not going to make it out. And I stopped and turned around and said, sure we are, come on. This is my guide dog, Roselle. She's guiding me and she'll encourage you. Roselle gave her kisses and this lady gave Roselle a few pets and so on, and other people surrounded her, and we had a group hug, and the lady was able to keep going. A few burn victims passed us on the stairs as we went down. At about the 50th floor, David, who had gotten a little quiet, suddenly said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. Now, you heard that I have a teaching credential. What you don't know, and teachers won't generally acknowledge it, but I'm going to tell you anyway, there's a secret class we take called Voice 101, How to Yell at Students. Didn't know that, did you? Huh? And anyway, as soon as David said, Mike, we're going to die, we're not going to make it out of here, I just said as sharply and with a snap in my voice that I could, stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. And David told me later that that brought him out of his funk. What he then said is, I got to keep my mind off this. I want to walk a floor below you and shout up to you what I see on the stairs. Is that okay? And I said, sure. Did I really need him to do that? No. Did it matter? No, but it did to David. However, what I came to realize over time was David doing that was one of the most important things that I experienced on that day. So I'm going down the stairs. I get to floor 49. David, I'm on the 48th floor. All's clear here, Mike. Going on down. I get to 48. Floor 47. We keep going down. Finally, I get to the 45th floor. David, I'm on the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is. Not stopping. So David was obviously doing better, and he kept going down. Why do I say what I did about David and doing that? Because David became a focal point for anyone within the sound of his voice who could hear him say, 43rd floor, all's clear, everything is good. He had to have helped thousands of people stay focused and not panic going down the stairs. And I think that was so cool that he did that all the way down. 42nd floor, all good. We kept going down the stairs. We met firefighters on the 30th floor. They wanted to escort me down, and I finally convinced them that I was capable of going down without them, and I did it by playing the sight card. I said, look, my friend David is here. He can see. We're good. And the firefighters let us go. I didn't want them to escort me. First of all, they don't know how to work with a blind guy and do sighted guide. But second of all, I didn't want to break up their team because I knew that each of those people were carrying the equipment that they had to use to fight the fire. You couldn't store it somewhere. Where would you store it? Oh, the 34th floor? And what happens if a fire broke out on the 33rd floor? You couldn't get to it. You had to carry the equipment. So we kept going down the stairs, finally got to the first floor. David got there, and I was at floor 2, and he said, hey, there are water sprinklers running. You're going to have to run through a waterfall or a down torrent of water to get out of the stairwell. Why was there all that water? Because it wanted to keep fire either in or out of the stairs if fire was around. David ran through. Then I got to the bottom. Roselle stood there, and I picked up her harness and said, Roselle, forward, hop up, which is a command to speed up. We went through this torrential downpour. It was a waterfall. And we came out the other side soaking. David was there, and there were voices. Hey, don't go outside. Don't go that way. Go this way. A PA system, a guy on a bullhorn. No, don't go outside. Don't go to the outside. Go this way. What we didn't know is if they had let people go out, they might have been right below where people were jumping. And so that was one of the reasons they didn't want anyone out. They wanted people to go through the complex and get out at the far side as far away from where everything was occurring that they could. This guy comes up to us and he goes, I'm with the FBI, I'll get you where you need to go. And of course, I'm sitting there with my warped sense of humor going, I'm sorry, I only talked to McGarrett. And I didn't do it, I'm innocent. I just thought that, I didn't say any of it out loud. Anyway, he got us through out to the outside of Tower 1. We passed now the empty Ben & Jerry's ice cream kiosk that was there. Darn, didn't get a chance for a scoop. Kept going, finally went up an escalator and got outside into the sunshine outside of of the whole complex, as far away from the towers as we could be. We got outside, we were told to leave the area, but David looked around and he said, Mike, I see fire in Tower 2. And I said, what are you talking about? There's fire in Tower 2. Really? What's that all about? We didn't feel a thing going down. We were in our own little cocoon, our own little cave. We had no clue. Anyway, we were told to leave, so we went to Broadway. We walked across the plaza to Broadway, turned left going now north on Broadway. There was a building on my left, Broadway was on my right. We crossed several streets, crossed Fulton Street, finally got to Vesey Street. David said, I want to stop because I can see the fire in Tower 2 really clearly from here. I want to take some pictures. And I said, great, I'll try to call my wife. I got out my phone. David was taking pictures, which I have today. I tried to call Karen. I couldn't get through. Later, of course, we learned that people were saying goodbye to loved ones, and that was why the circuits were busy. I had just put my phone away, and a police officer, and while David was putting his camera away, and a police officer yelled, get out of here, it's coming down now. We heard this rumble that became this deafening roar. I describe it as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear glass breaking and tinkling and metal crashing down, and then this white noise sound as Tower 2, 100 yards away from us, pancaked down. Everyone turned and ran. David ran. He was gone. I literally lifted Roselle by the harness, turned her 180 degrees, and started running back the way we came. And the first thing I remember saying in my mind was, God, I cannot believe that you got us out of a building just to have it fall on us. And as soon as I thought that, I heard in my head as clearly as you hear me now, a voice that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle, and the rest will take care of itself. It was God. Absolutely no question. Don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle, and the rest will take care of itself. And so I also had this incredible sense of peace and calm that came over me that said, you're okay if you work together. We kept running. We got back to Fulton Street, turned right on Fulton Street, and ran about 25 yards, and suddenly we caught up to David, who had apparently gone the same way. And David suddenly realized that he had left us behind, and he was going to come back, but we caught up to him first. And he apologized. I said, David, don't worry about it. Let's just keep going. The building's coming down, you know. And we both just started to run with Roselle. And suddenly we were engulfed in all the dirt and debris and the dust cloud from Tower 2. It was so thick that David said he couldn't see his hand 6 inches in front of his face. And all I can tell you is that every breath I took, I felt dirt and debris and junk going down my throat into my stomach. And we knew we had to get out of that, so I started telling Roselle, go right. There was a building on our right side, and I wanted her to find the nearest opening. If she could even hear me, see my hand signals, or whatever. And I was also listening for openings. Yes, I can hear when I pass an opening, and I can tell it's there and deal with it accordingly. Like during a time when you're running away from a collapsing building, run into it. Suddenly I heard an opening on the right, and Roselle must have known what I wanted. She must have been able to see my hand signals or something, because she turned right, she took one step, she stopped, and she would not move. Come on, Roselle, keep going. She wouldn't move. Come on, Roselle. Nope, wouldn't do it. And I realized, focus on running with Roselle, and the rest will take care of itself. So I stuck out a foot, I trailed a hand along the wall and realized that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. Roselle had done exactly what she was supposed to do. And I knew what I was supposed to do if I wanted to get her to move. But before I did that, I gave her a big hug, good girl, and then I said, Roselle, forward. That's the command. And we went down the stairs into an arcade area that was the entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. There were a few other people down there. Then a guy came up from the subway system and saw about 8 or 9 of us there. He introduced himself as Lou, an employee of the subway system, and he took us down to an employee locker room where we could sit down and kind of hack and cough and get the dust out of our lungs. There was a water fountain and there were fans. We were there about 10 minutes, then a police officer came and he said, you got to get out of here right now. The air is clear up above. You can't stay here. And so we followed him. Of course, he probably had already been told that Tower 1 was going to collapse. The officials knew that each building was going to collapse probably about a half hour before it actually did. At least that was their presumption, and that's what I've been told. Anyway, we followed him back up the stairs, through the arcade, up the last 2 flights of stairs. We got outside. David looked around and he goes, oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore. And I said, what do you see? And he said, all I see are pillars of smoke hundreds of feet tall. We stood there for a moment, and then we just turned and we kept walking now west on Fulton Street. We walked about 10 minutes and we were in this little plaza area when we heard that freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew it must be our tower collapsing. We saw a little retaining wall, David did, and we got behind it and ducked down, and we waited until everything stopped, and then we stood back up, and David looked around and he said, oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore. And I said, what do you see? And he said, I just see fingers of fire and flame hundreds of feet tall. And I see pillars of smoke. It's gone. Are you sure? Yeah, it's gone. It's not there. We stood there a moment. Then I tried to call my wife Karen again. That was kind of my first thought. I need to tell her we're okay. This time I did get through because clearly the circuits were free. And after some tears on both sides of the phone, she is the one who told us how 2 aircraft had deliberately been hijacked and crashed into the towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th at that time was still missing over Pennsylvania. Who would have thought? We spent the rest of that day getting up toward Midtown Manhattan, and eventually I got to Penn Station, learned that the trains were running, and went back out to New Jersey. David wanted to go back up to be with his sister, who he was staying with. She lived on the Upper East Side. So I got on trains and I went back over toward New Jersey. I called Karen and told her what was going on. And a friend of ours, a friend that Karen had known since high school out in California, Tom Painter, was also living in New Jersey. He had come down to be with her, not even knowing at the time whether I was in the World Trade Center or working from home that day or whatever. But he drove her to the station in our accessible van. And as I came off the train, I heard the van show up. I went downstairs, climbed in, went up the ramp into the van, and got to hug Karen about 7 o'clock that night for the first time since leaving home. We got home. Tom drove us home. We all went inside. I was going to take Roselle outside because she hadn't been out since like 5 that morning. Well, I take that back, about 6 that morning. And I took her harness off, but before I could do anything else, she was off like a shot. She went to her toy box, found her favorite tug bone, and started playing tug-of-war with my retired guide dog, Linny. Why? Because it was over for her. And I talked to the guide dog people later, and I said, will any of this affect her? And they said, was she threatened? Did anything hit her or injure her in any way? And I said, no. They said, then no, it was over for her, because dogs don't do what if. It was over. It was done. She was fine. Lesson to be learned. Lesson you will learn more about if you buy our new book, Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs About Being Brave, Overcoming Adversity, and Walking in Faith. That book is available for pre-order, and I've been signing bookmarks all day. I still even have a few with me, but the point is you can pre-order it, and it's about something that I learned later, I thought about during the pandemic, I've talked a lot about escaping and not being afraid because I developed a mindset that said, you know what to do. But what I've not done is to teach others how they can learn to recognize that fear is not something that needs to blind or overwhelm you. You can use fear as a very powerful tool to guide you and steer you in the right direction if you know how to control it. And Live Like a Guide Dog is all about that. So I hope that you'll all get that when it comes out in August. But again, you can pre-order it now. If you go to michaelhingson.com, there's a link there where you can go to a web page to get information and to go to a link where you can pre-order it. And like I said, I have some bookmarks with a QR code on it. Yes, I am plugging the book, but I'm also saying, look, folks, the bottom line is we operate in so many ways with misconceptions about things. I've talked about blindness. Anybody could have been in the World Trade Center, and a lot of people were. The reality is, though, if you learn what to do and how to prepare for situations in general, when it becomes something specific, you'll know what to do. People have asked a number of times, well, wasn't your guide dog trained to operate in an emergency like the World Trade Center? How are we going to do that? No, the dog isn't trained to do that. The guide dog's job is not to lead. Guide dogs do not lead blind people. Guide dogs' jobs are to make sure that we walk safe. It's my job to know where to go and how to get there to give the dog direction. The dog depends and relies on me to give it direction. The dog's job, as I said, is to make sure we walk safely. It's a team effort. We each have a job to do, and we develop a trusting relationship when we learn to trust each other and respect the job the other member of the team is doing, which is what it's all about, which is what happens on any team. Trust is all around us. Trust is under attack in so many ways from our politicians and in so many ways, but the reality is trust is all around us. I think we all trust that the roof isn't going to fall in on the church. I think that we trust that the PA system is going to continue to work, and so on. Trust is all around us. The difference between dogs and people is that dogs, while they do love unconditionally, do not trust unconditionally. But dogs are open to trust unless some incredibly traumatic thing has happened to them where they lose that ability. But dogs are open to trust. Dogs want humans to give them direction, to establish rules. And all too often with our pets and so on, we don't do that. We don't really develop the relationship that we should and can with them. If we would have so much stronger bond and relationships with them. It would be amazing for all of us. But the bottom line is that's the relationship that I get with each guide dog. That's the relationship I have with Alamo. He trusts that I am going to feed him before too awfully long. He trusts that you guys are going to buy books, so he'll have kibbles for me to feed him. Just saying. But seriously, the trust has to be earned with a dog or with people or whatever. And if you find that you discover you can't trust someone, don't wish them ill will. Forgive them and move on. So you don't trust them, but you know what you have. And you go off and make new friends and learn other trusting relationships that you can develop. Focus on running with Roselle, the rest will take care of itself. The reality is we worry so much about so many things. We are always doing what if. We create most of the fears that we face in our lives. And we don't need to do that. If we would focus on just the things that we have some control over and leave the rest alone, we might want to be aware of them, but we don't have to worry about them. We don't have control over them. Trust and deal with the things that you have to deal with and let the rest take care of itself. And that was what I learned on September 11th, listening to the voice of God, absolutely. And that is something that I pass on to all of you. And I think that's the most important thing that I can leave you with. Now, did I answer your question, Mary?